Namaste and welcome everyone to our continuing series Evenings with Sraddhalu. Namaste.
Namaste and welcome to all.
We are happy to continue today on the current affairs with a special focus now on the west of Bengal. And you may address your questions during our conversation in the chat box, or you may address your question on this subject or other subjects at email ID integralstudies.in@gmail.com.
So the theme today is West Bengal, and we will begin with a question from Anupam. It's a long thing with, I think, 17 questions,
Yes.
17 observations and 3 questions, of which I've edited out the first 10 questions, but we'll look at the others.
So Anupam is writing, I have something to share regarding what you have said about RG car rape and murder case on your previous video dated 17 August. And I want to raise some facts and questions regarding this. So these 10 important questions have been a bit edited to make them short. Then we have 11. When all media attention is on this case, there are huge numbers of refugees coming through Maldah and Murshidabad, and among the Muslims are maximum under the disguise of Hindus. No media channel is talking about this. The 12th topic will be drug, sex, medicine, bio-waste, all rackets and scams are there. There is evidence of what students have to do to pass their exams, especially female students. Number 13, a political spokesperson named Kunal Ghosh was given the responsibility to deliver those related files and documents to the CBI office. In Bengal, there is no IPS or other officials. 14, TMC's own party members speaking on behalf of their heinous crime are all being sacked. 15, all over India, the media are spreading that to damage the reputation of our chief minister, those protests are happening. 16, the civic volunteers by whose help this heinous crime has happened have got their salary bonus increased, declared by our chief minister. 17, at the last, what is happening? Home Minister Mamata Banerjee will lead a protest march against Health Minister Mamata Banerjee to pressurize Honorable Chief Minister of West Bengal Mamata Banerjee to find out the culprits of RG card murder and punish them. Now all over India, peaceful protests are happening. But I have some questions. A, isn't peace and protest self-contradictory? B, do you really think freedom and justice will be achieved without blood? C, do you think this time the soul, the spirit of Bengal will rise? Quite a few.
Yes. I've kept some of these somewhat detailed comments also as a kind of a summary of how serious the situation is. For those who don't have the background of what has been happening in West Bengal, I just give a very quick recapitulation of which I had made a passing reference last time when I said that the Supreme Court had suo motu taken over the case just to take the pressure off from attention on the Chief Minister of West Bengal. And I described how much there is corruption within the courts. Obviously, it's not intended to say that all judges are corrupt, but it is a very large, highly corrupt tendency within all the courts of India for a very simple reason. The judges pick themselves. And this has been going on in what is called the collegium system now for nearly 35 years, that if once a judge is sufficiently corrupt, he will pick people who are worse than him, who then become chief judges and eventually chief justices, even in the Supreme Court, who will pick and select those who are less, more corrupt than them, because that becomes their hook to maintain their position. There will never be the reversal where a corrupt judge will select a less corrupt judge. And 35 years is enough that some of the good judges have managed to get through because they were already in senior positions. But increasingly it becomes difficult for judges who are not either controlled by cabal or deep state interests or are not quite openly corrupt to come into positions. So that was in the context of what I had observed last time. But what happened in West Bengal a few weeks ago, where there was a case of a young girl, medical intern, who was raped and killed in early hours of the night in one of the biggest hospitals in Kolkata city. And subsequently, there were a series of events in which the entire thing was hushed up. The rape and murder were done so blatantly as to have shocked the whole country. These things happen pretty much eventually anywhere in the world. And they always happen when it is a barbaric human in a state of inebriation or extreme barbarism that such kind of heinous crimes happen. They rarely happen in the middle of a city in one of the most well-lit, well-known hospitals where literally hundreds, thousands of people are working, patients, doctors, all the time, even in night duty. That is the first big shock. But also that immediately following is a massive cover-up by the hospital administration, which then is very close to the chief minister, and the chief minister actively participates in the cover-up. And I don't want to go into details. I have not given too many links about this. You've all been seeing this in the media, I suppose. But why would that be? The question I'm asking is, why and how could such a thing happen? And especially at a time when things are so politically sensitive, when attention would so easily come and even topple governments if such crimes are openly supported. And yet they don't even care, they don't even fear. They don't fear the public. And what has happened subsequently as the investigations have begun, we discovered that the hospital administration head was involved in drugs, bio-waste trafficking, medicine trafficking. Students had to pay money to pass exams. Some of them had to pass sexual favors to pass exams. Everything, even to pass exams, you had to keep paying money. And this is one of the most reputed large hospitals in the middle of one of the biggest cities of the country. And blatantly, openly, the police is not allowed to investigate freely. The CBI is being blocked. And when at some point the CBI was going to begin the investigations and enter the place where the rape took place and the murder, the large number of goons came in the evening and destroyed all the evidence, ransacked the whole place. And the police were nowhere to be seen. It was at a time when there was actually a demonstration against the rape and murder, demanding justice, and the goons come, destroy everything, and the police is nowhere. And the police, interestingly, and the whole home minister, in this case the home minister is the chief minister herself, health minister is chief minister herself, everything is under her, and the police is nowhere. Soon after, when there's a political demonstration against all this, the police go there and put on riot gear and harm people. I don't know if there were shootings, but the chief minister praises them for having gone against those who demanded justice, while the goons who destroyed the evidence, the police were nowhere. These are things which are happening so blatantly, and fortunately there is enough media coverage, at least on these aspects. Much has been diluted since the Supreme Court took over the case, because the focus has shifted now to raising questions and waiting for answers from a government which is not providing them. The West Bengal government had 26 lawyers, with one senior lawyer followed by 26 lawyers in a huge mass standing in the middle of Supreme Court. I would simply ask one question: why would you need 26 lawyers? And many of them were juniors. Why would you need that If not, the goal was to put an impression of strength, pressure, force on the judge. You don't need 26 people to be there. In fact, it creates greater chaos. You'd have done the background research and summarized it with 2 or 3 people backing you for doing the presentation. So all of this is being done in such a blatant way. And why would the West Bengal government hire 26 and the prices that they have to pay to the senior lawyers? All this is very, very openly, flagrantly demonstrated. They don't care. They don't care, and you have to understand, because they're so well entrenched, they do not care what happens in the public image. And why has this situation come? I'm not going to go too much into the case. I'm only pointing to 2 observations which Anupam has made, which are, I think, very interesting, very interestingly spoken. He says, Home Minister Mamta Banerjee will lead a protest march against Health Minister Mamta Banerjee to pressure Chief Minister Mamta Banerjee to find the culprits of the murder and punish them. That's the ridiculousness of the situation. There's another observation he has made. The civic volunteers with whose help this heinous crime has happened have got a salary bonus declared just after. And the things are connected. I'm not going to go into this first. I'm first going to step back by a little more than 100 years, perhaps even 150 years. And that's why I've themed this West Bengal. How did such a situation come about? Because if you go back 1,000 years, Bengal, Orissa, coastal region, were the most wealthy in many ways, were the hub of industry, the hub of production, shipping, trade routes, the centers for the largest shipping construction as well as shipping ports, and up to nearly 150 years ago, around 1910, which is now, let's say, 115 years before, India had the world's biggest shipbuilding industry. A single ship built in India could go on an ocean-going voyage with 200 to 300 people on the ship traveling by ocean. So it also speaks of navigation skills. And they would trade with Europe. Massive ships going. And comparatively, European ships were little boats compared to these gigantic ships. European ships would last 30 years at most. These ships would last 50 years. That was the reputation. And these are from British records. And the shipbuilding industry, the hub was in Bengal as well as Gujarat. 1910, the British passed a law that you could not build a ship without permission. So it's innocuous. You see the technique used, and this is even to this day, governments use this. You see this happening in the deep state control across countries in the United States and Europe the same way. You pass a law by putting controls, and then through the controls you stop it. So they stopped giving permission for ships. The entire shipbuilding industry collapsed, became a ship-breaking industry, which still remains one of the biggest ship-breaking industries in the world, largely today centered in Gujarat. But still, I think in Orissa coast there are some. That was the condition, and you must understand, we'll refer to Sri Aurobindo many times now. When Sri Aurobindo enters the scene of the freedom struggle, 1905-6, let's say, he leaves his position with the Maharaja of Baroda and enters full time to fight for India's freedom. That is 1906. Before that, he has written articles, he has organized an underground movement, traveled all over the country, has given speeches quietly and organized things, but it never took off in the big way that it took off after he left and formally joined and began to write articles from within Calcutta and going around making openly public speeches. So what happened in 1905 and 6 is extremely important to what is happening today. And that's why I'm going back into the history for 2 reasons. First, to understand why this took place in a region which was for a long time the hub of wealth, trade, and even of intelligence, of arts, of civilization. There are always pockets everywhere. Even in a large civilization, there are specialized pockets, and this was one of the specialized pockets in India. From there to this condition, where goons run an entire state, and you have almost daily similar things happening. In this case, it happened in one of the big cities and one of the big hospitals. What has led to this decline? And then I'm linking it to the question Anupam has asked, do you think this time the soul spirit of Bengal will rise? And can freedom, justice be achieved without blood? What is this peace and protest? Is it self-contradictory? So I'm putting all this in context by looking first at the past. There are two lessons, one to understand specifically for West Bengal and the other to understand for India and the rest of the world. And as we will read some of the observations of Sri Aurobindo, it should be a warning for us. And so I will even generalize the question to, will the spirit of the nation, of India, and even of other nations rise at a time of crisis? And we'll understand the larger context of how and why these things happen. I want to take also, before entering the background of the past, point to the civic volunteers which Anupam has referred to. What is this civic volunteer? And I've put a link here. It is one of those very rare situations where mainstream media actually speaks openly the truth. And it is on Telegraph, and the author is one Arnab Ganguly. And the title is this: Arjika Rape and Murder Unmasks the Shadowy World of Bengal's Civic Volunteers. What is this civic volunteer? More than 130,000 individuals have been labelled by the current Chief Minister as civic volunteers, according to the office of the Chief Minister, and this is the official number. And one of them was this person who committed the murder and rape. He was a guard at this hospital. And the privilege of these civic volunteers is what I'm looking at now, and what is their thing. I'm reading from the article a few lines. Roy's arrest, details are emerging on the kind of privileges he enjoyed. He lived in the barracks of the Calcutta Police's 4th Battalion, used a motorbike marked police. He was not a policeman. He was a party goon. Over the years, civic volunteers have been drawn from vast numbers of unemployed youth in the state who don't have much of an education and who cannot get a job because they don't have an education. Most of them have not crossed education beyond the age of 15 or 14. They are paid a salary of 9,000 rupees a month, where you have a job-starved state. I'm reading from the article, where the number of job seekers last year was 7.76 million. The civic volunteers were initially recruited to help traffic police. They've been co-opted to now be part of police teams. So effectively what happens, one policeman is surrounded by 4 or 5 of these civic volunteers. They have no training in law, no police training, no human rights training. They are rather the party members of the Trinamool Congress who have just been given jobs for doing nothing. And what is interesting is, you're recruited if you're part of the party and promise allegiance to party interests. And they run personal errands for the police, extort money on their behalf, run surveillance on opposition politicians. Now you see, here is an organized mafia which is state funded, but given the privileges of the official police, even with the dress and the motorcycles of the police, living in police barracks. And what happens is, among their duties, they manage traffic, they effectively make money while managing traffic. So there's a mention of how, if you want to go in a road which against the direction of the official, it's a one-way road, and if you want to go against the one-way, there's a civic police there, civic official, who takes money from you to allow you to break the law. And these are people who have no allegiance to the value of a policeman. They have not passed through any kind of training or vetting. So they're just making money on the side. Pretty much they can do anything, and mostly they break the law and take money for breaking the law and allowing you to break the law. I don't go into details, the rest is there in the article itself. Their training is just 10 days and that's it. Examples of how they dupe people is also mentioned. They will stand at U-turns where your U-turn is not permitted and openly take money and allow you to make the U-turn. And that's their pocket money. And they have to pass on commissions to policemen, etc. Now, effectively, when a policeman has to do his duty, he cannot, because he's surrounded by the goons who want to do their thing. So, I'll let you read the article if you want. But this is a condition which is so serious. The entire state is now reduced to a mafia state. And the mafia is backed by, supported by, funded by the state police. And this, you have to understand, is one of the worst in terms of grades of people you could have had, even in the mafia. So, with this background now, we look at how this situation has come about and what are the warnings that Sri Aurobindo has given going back nearly 100 years. So, first of all, we look at a letter of Sri Aurobindo where he is speaking of, it's written to his, I'll first take it's a talk that he gives. The letter will come to later. So, he's speaking of, it's a public lecture, and he's speaking of the importance of the nationalism and how nationalism is the religion that has come for God, which is to love your motherland and to work for your motherland. And he says, you call yourselves nationalists? What is nationalism? Nationalism is not a mere political program. Nationalism is a religion that has come from God. Nationalism is a creed in which you shall have to live. Let no man dare to call himself a nationalist if he does so merely with a sort of intellectual pride, thinking that he is more patriotic, thinking that he is something higher than those who do not call themselves by that name. If you are going to be a nationalist, if you are going to ascend to this religion of nationalism, you must do it in the religious spirit. You must remember that you are instrument of God for the salvation of your country. You must live as the instrument of God. Now we have to understand the word religious here is a spiritual term. And now he says, what is this that has happened in Bengal? You call yourselves nationalists. But when this happens to you, what will you do? This thing is happening daily in Bengal, because in Bengal, nationalism has come to the people as a religion and it has been accepted as a religion. But certain forces which are against that religion are trying to crush its rising strength. It always happens when a new religion is preached, when God is going to be born in the people, that such forces rise with all their weapons in their hands to crush this religion. In Bengal too, a new religion, a religion divine and sattvic, has been preached. And this religion they are trying with all their weapons at their command to crush. Now you understand, there is a spiritual awakening taking place and immediately the forces come to try to crush this. And this is what he is describing. And I'm relating it to Anupam's question, will Bengal rise? Or to the larger question, will humanity rise in your space? So, by what strength are we in Bengal able to survive? Nationalism has not been crushed. Nationalism is not going to be crushed. Nationalism survives in the strength of God, and it is not possible to crush it, whatever weapons are brought against it. Nationalism is immortal. Nationalism cannot die because it is no human thing. It is God who is working in Bengal. Okay, very powerful words. I am skipping a few words though. And remember, this is a talk he is giving in Pune, in Maharashtra. He's telling them what's happening in Bengal, and will you also rise to this commitment for the awakening of India? Then he says, let me tell you what it is that has happened in Bengal. You all know what Bengal used to be. You all know what Bengal used to be in terms of, you all know that Bengali used to be a term of reproach among the nations. Used to be when people spoke of Bengal, with what feeling did they speak of it? Was it with feelings of respect? Was it with feelings of admiration? You know very well what people of other countries used to say of the Bengali. If anybody had told you that Bengal would come forward as the savior of India, how many of you would have believed it? You would have said, no, The savior of India cannot be Bengal. It may be Maharashtra, it may be Punjab, but it will not be Bengal. The idea is absurd. What has happened then? What has caused this change? What has made the Bengali so different from his old self? So, we are looking at a period where already the British had crushed the circumstances in Bengal, and again I will go back to the historical circumstance, 1850 to 1910. That whole period of nearly 60 years, there were famines after famines in the region of Bengal and Orissa of today. The whole thing was one large region. And people were dying all over India, but this particular place was extreme. The condition as a result was that the entire region was brought to its knees. And with that inertia, education, all those things which have been crushed. So that was the condition. So what makes Bengal different today from what it was just a decade or two ago? One thing has happened in Bengal, and it is this, that Bengal is learning to believe. Bengal was once drunk with the wine of European civilization and the purely intellectual teaching that it received from the West. It began to see all things, to judge all things through the imperfect instrumentality of the intellect. When it was so, Bengal became atheistic. It became a land of doubters and cynics. Whatever the Bengali believed, if he believed at all, many do not believe. But if he believed at all, there was one thing about the Bengali, that he lived what he believed. And so he goes on. Well, what was the one saving element in the Bengali nature? The Bengali has the faculty of belief. Belief is not a mere intellectual process. Remember, this is a report, so we don't have exact words. Belief is not mere persuasion of the mind. Belief is something that is in our heart, and what you believe you must do because belief is from God. Today we will use the word faith. It is to the heart that God speaks. It is in the heart that God resides. This saved the Bengali. Because of this capacity of belief, we were chosen as the people who were to save India. The people who were to stand foremost. The people who must suffer for their belief. The people who must meet everything in the faith that God was with them and that God is in them. Now, you would say, well, what about the rest? To this, Sri Aurobindo's response, such a people need not be politically strong. It need not be a people sound in physique. It need not be a people of the highest intellectual standing. Now, all this is helpful, but it says it's not even needed. It must be a people who can believe. In Bengal, there came a flood of religious truth. Certain men were born, men whom the educated world would not have recognized if that belief, if that God within them had not been there to open their eyes. Men whose lives were very different from what our education, our Western education, taught us to admire. And then he speaks of, he doesn't name him, there was one man who had been what they call absolutely useless to the world, but he had this one divine faculty in him, that he had more than faith and had realized God. He was a man who lived what many would call a life of a madman, a man without intellectual training, a man without outward sign of culture or civilization, a man who lived on the arms of others. Such a man as the English educated Indian would ordinarily talk of as one useless to society. But he's talking about Ramakrishna Paramahansa. And he goes on, God knew what he was doing. He sent that man to Bengal and set him in the temple of Dakshineshwar in Kolkata, and from north and south and east and west. The educated men who had studied in Europe came to fall at the feet of this ascetic. The work of salvation, the work of raising India was begun. Now you must understand, Sri Aurobindo is linking the rise of the Indian spirit from Ramakrishna Paramahansa's incarnation. And so I'm skipping this now. He speaks of how the mantra of Vande Mataram was given, and how others in Bengal awoke, rose, etc. And he uses the word sadhu, people who lived a spiritual life, a dedicated spiritual life, sometimes ascetic, but dedicated spiritual. and sometimes they would be called mad because they believed in something which was impossible to most people. So he says how when they were speaking of fighting for India's freedom, all the intellectuals said it's impossible. You will never manage this because you don't have the public support. And so Sri Aurobindo makes reference to all these things. And I skip this because it's a long lecture, and the whole thrust of this you get from these few words. Towards the end he says, can you suffer? Can you survive? The young men of Bengal who had rushed forward in the frenzy of the moment, rushed forward rejoicing in the newfound strength, etc. They were called to bear the crown, not the victory. So there was a whole generation which willingly suffered, which accepted to suffer, go to jail, to die even, for the freedom of the country which they might not see, and many did not see during their lifetime. And perhaps they never had even hoped that they might see, and yet they did it because of this. So this was a speech delivered 19th January 1908. Sri Aurobindo is already in the full power of his work of awakening India. Articles are already going out, and these are the occasional public lectures which are outside Bengal also. Now I'm skipping to another one where again he speaks of the Bengali mind and heart. And all this you will understand what has happened, why the decline, and what is still there, and what has to be recovered. This is from a writing of Sri Aurobindo, which is called The Brain of India, which is also, let's say, around that period. And he's speaking of education. He is writing articles on education, and this is part of a larger body of writings. He says, the time has come for the Indian mind, long preoccupied with political and economic issues, for a widening of its horizon. Such a widening is especially necessary for Bengal. The Bengali has always led and still leads the higher thought of India, because he has eminently the gifts which are most needed for the new race that has to arise. He has the emotion and imagination which is open to the great inspirations, the mighty heart-stirring ideas that move humanity when a great step forward has to be taken. He has the invaluable gift of thinking with his heart. He has too a subtle brain which is able, within certain limits, to catch shades of meaning and delicacies of thought, both those the logic grasps and those which escape the mere logical intellect. Above all, he has in a greater degree than other races the yet undeveloped faculty of direct knowledge, latent in humanity and now to be evolved, which is above reason and imagination, the faculty which in Sri Ramakrishna, the supreme outcome of the race, dispensed with education and commanded any knowledge he desired easily and divinely. So again we see similar ideas from earlier, but he refers to Ramakrishna Paramahansa as the supreme outcome of the race. So again we have to understand there's a context why I'm highlighting these things. There's a place where he speaks of elsewhere, I think it is part of this text, where he says how sometimes an entire region or even a nation or a race makes a huge effort and throws something extraordinary and then lapses into tiredness and needs to go into a kind of a rest or loss before it can rebuild. That also can happen, but he speaks of how this power of the intuition works yet irregularly in humanity, etc. I skip portions. He speaks of the science of yoga. Now we come again to the text, the portion of the Bengali. The Bengali has always worshipped the divine energy in her most terrible as well as in her most beautiful aspects. Whether as the beautiful or the terrible mother, he has never shrunk from her, whether in fear or in awe. When the divine force flowed into him, he has never feared to yield himself up to it and follow the infinite prompting, careless whither it led. Now this is all actually a spiritual teaching. While he is describing the tendency of the race, and this is a large tendency going back quite a few hundreds of years, ignoring the decline which had already begun at that point. So he's describing a tendency of the race, but also all of these are psychological tendencies we all can have, and it is meant to be even a part of our yoga. As a reward, he has become the most perfect Adhara, container of Shakti, the most capable and swiftly sensitive and responsive receptacle of the infinite will and energy the world now holds. Quite a statement. In the whole world, the most perfect receptacle of that energy. Recently, the will and energy has rushed into him and has been lifting him to the level of his future mission and destiny. But it doesn't mean the Adhara is perfect. It just means it's the best one so far. He has now to learn the secret of drawing the mother of strength into himself and holding her there in a secure possession. Secure possession. That is why we have pointed to a religious and spiritual awakening as the next necessity and the next inevitable development. Now again, all this if you take for yourself, he is telling you also what is necessary for the sadhana for those who want to serve a greater cause, who want to work for the national uplift, etc. But along with his great possessions, the Bengali has serious deficiencies. In common with the rest of India, now look at this bigger picture. He has a great deficiency of knowledge, the result of an education meager in quantity and absolutely vicious in method and quality. These are very strong words. Meager in quantity, what are you taught even today? And vicious in method and quality. Vicious, you understand the intensity of the word. It's actually so destructive. And elsewhere he uses this phrase, even that it is an asuric form of education which has been imposed from Europe on India, of course with colonial objectives. And about the Bengali. And he is inferior to other Indian races such as the Madrasi and Maratha. Madrasi is the term for the southerners, typically Tamil Nadu, and the Maratha would be the Maharashtrians. In their capacity of calm, measured and comprehensive deliberation, which is usually called intellect or reasoning power, and which, though it is far from the whole of thought, is essential to the completeness of thought and action. By itself, the logical or reasoning intellect creates the accurate and careful scholar, the sober critic, the rationalist and cautious politician, the conservative scientist, the great mass of human intelligence which makes for slow and careful progress. It does not create the hero and the originator, the inspired prophet, the mighty builder, the maker of nations. It does not conquer nature and destiny, lay its hand on the future, command the world. The rest of India is largely dominated by this faculty and limited by it, and therefore it lags behind while Bengal rushes forward. So he's showing you what is making possible this rapid rush, but also what it is lacking, which other parts of India have much better. The rest of India has feared to deliver itself to the power that came down from above to uplift the nation. It has either denied its call or made reservations and insisted on guiding it and reining it in. A few mighty men have stridden forward and carried their race or a part of it with them. But the whole race must be infused with the spirit before it can be fit for the work of the future. I am reminded immediately also of a similar example, which in Europe you will understand what happened in Ireland during a similar period, paralleling what was happening in India. There was this tremendous downpour. The collective mass could not rise, but there were these extraordinary intelligent individuals who just rose, heroically attained something, and sometimes were eliminated, assassinated or killed or whatever. One of these, I am not sure of the name, and if someone can put it in the chat box if you remember, a young man at the age of 21 in Ireland who worked from behind the scenes, organized the entire revolution, and later his own team members betrayed him out of jealousy. They put him forward into public. The British didn't even know what he looked like. Michael something, Michael. There's a movie which was made on him. See if you can find the movie. It's worth seeing. They put him forward. It was not his work. And the British, once they saw his face, they shot him and killed. Eliminated the head. After that, again, the movement collapsed. This is around 1920. Michael... whatever, doesn't matter. But we understand this happens everywhere in the world. There's a tremendous descent of a Shakti to help humanity, to help a nation, to help a people. But will you respond? Will you wake up? And sometimes it's just a few individuals because the mass is not ready. And that's what he's describing. A few mighty men. But you see also in Bengal at that time, you had not only Sri Aurobindo, Ramakrishna Paramhans, Swami Vivekananda, you had Rabindranath Tagore and others, great scientists, J.C. Bose and others, poets, literators, freedom fighters, Khudiram, young man, less than 20, who stood against the British and eventually hanged. Michael Collins, yes. V gives the name, yes. Michael Collins is the name. Please look up the movie which is called Michael Collins. Worth seeing. It brings tears to your eyes. And the contrast. One extraordinary hero and a people which is not ready. So I'm continuing the text again to understand the work to be done from a sadhana perspective all over humanity today. Because if we are facing exactly the same crisis that we've been talking about everywhere in the world, and we are at the threat of being completely swamped by the cabal and satanic interests which are pushing the world into the grip of a one world government. It's the same revolution that is needed which we saw in India against colonial rule, or we saw in Ireland against colonial rule. It's exactly the same revolution. Maybe the forms would be different because the circumstances are totally different. But still it needs this power and the receiving of the power of the Shakti to be an instrument. So I read the text again. On his side, the Bengali, while in no way limiting the divine inrush or shortening the Titan's stride, must learn to see the way he is going while he treads it. So this is the limitation of the Bengali. For want of a trained thought power, he follows indeed the ideas that seize him, but he does not make them thoroughly his own. He thinks them out, if at all, rapidly but not comprehensively. And in consequence, though he has applied them with great energy to the circumstances immediately around him, a new set of circumstances finds him perplexed and waiting for a lead from the few men to whom he has been accustomed to look for the source of his thought and action. Now think of this, the description is quite accurate for large parts of India. And I will even say large parts of the world. Wherever you ask people, well, what's happening in this, where will the people wake up? The first question is, where are the leaders? Who is there that we can follow? You see the similar thinking. You want that extraordinary person. And if you say that, I want a leader, then the cabal will offer you what they call controlled opposition. And you will be led astray. So the challenge today is slightly different. It needs this mass awakening. You may not be able to trust even some of the leaders, but with discrimination you might still be able to recognize them. This is a source of weakness. For the work of the present and still more for the work of the future, it is imperatively necessary to create a center of thought and knowledge which will revolutionize the brain of the nation to as great an extent as its character and outlook have been revolutionized. So character, outlook, but not your thought in the revolution. A new heart is necessary for our civilization, and though the renovation is not complete, the work that has been done in that direction will ensure its own fulfillment. A new brain is also needed, and the sufficiency of knowledge for the new brain to do its work with thoroughness. Now, this is literally an introduction of a long text which is published today as The Brain of India. Unfortunately, it is where he presents his ideas on education also, but unfortunately it's cut off from the rest of his articles on education. All this is preparatory to creating a new system of education, a national education for India and eventually for the world, which today we know as integral education. But see, this is the framework of his thought. He's looking at the future 100 years from now, at least from then. And today, 100 years later, we are still nowhere near in terms of our education. After having got freedom from colonial rule, we still continued the same education and the same colonization of the mentality. So I'm skipping the rest of the text. This is just a touch of a few important ideas. We come to another of his articles and talks. It's a letter to Barin, and he has just come out of, this is dated, it is correct, yes, April 1920. He's just, Barin is asking him, why are you not coming back to lead the freedom struggle, etc. And he writes about this, about the yoga, what he's doing, and how he will come when he is ready. But he is himself not ready because he has to achieve something and bring down this supramental consciousness first. He says, after 15 years, I am only now rising into the lowest of the three levels of the supermind and trying to draw up into it all the lower activities. So he has got to this point, the lowest of the three levels of supermind, and all his human consciousness is now drawing into this grade of consciousness. But when the process is complete, and there is not the least doubt that God through me will give this supramental perfection to others with less difficulty. Now I'm reading this so that you know this is our context today. All of us can receive that help. God through him will give this supramental perfection to others with less difficulty. And then my real work will begin. I am not impatient for the fulfillment of my work. Okay. And then he says, I know that Bengal is not ready. The spiritual flood which has come is for the most part a new form of the old. It is not a real change. But it too was needed. Bengal has been awakening within itself all the old yogas in order to exhaust their ingrained tendencies, extract their essence, and with it fertilize the soil. So he gives you a whole list of how it went through Vedanta, doctrine of non-dualism, asceticism, illusionism of Shankara, and so forth. And then it's now entered into Vaishnava religion, the divine play, love, losing oneself in the delight of spiritual emotion. And then he says, all this is very old and unsuitable for the new age. Very, very briefly, simply stated. It cannot last, for such excitement has no lasting power. But the Vaishnava way has its merit, that it keeps the certain connection between God and the world and gives a meaning to life. So, because it's not complete, there's a sectarianism that comes from it and so on. So, he describes all this. You understand Sri Aurobindo's perspective. He's seeing things from the larger evolutionary processes and the working of the divine in a people, in a nation, and across the world. And the nuances with which he explains what is happening, why it's happening, where it's leading. He has a vision of the whole future towards which things are moving and the place of everything that's happening currently. And then he says, the realized man who comes up with an idea keeps, even if he leans on one part, some awareness of the whole, although he is not able to give it form. But his disciples are not able to do this because the form is lacking. They are tying up their bundles. Let them. When God descends completely on the country, the bundles will open of themselves. All these things are signs of incompleteness and immaturity. I am not disturbed by them. Let the force of spirituality have its play in the country. in whatever way and through as many sects as there may be. So again, we can understand it in today's context. Afterwards, we shall see. This is the infancy, the embryonic state, even of the new age. Just a hint, not yet the beginning. So he speaks about Motilal's group, etc. Moreover, he speaks of Motilal's group. So there, moreover, he took to my yoga, as is natural to the Bengali nature, not so much from the side of knowledge as from the side of devotion and service. So again, speaking of the Bengali nature in the spiritual context, I am skipping this part, and now we come. What he says, what is needed. He says the necessity of Sangha, etc. is there, but what is needed, and he says, on one side there is the flood of devotion, on the other side the effort to make money. But during the 10-year period that Bengal was lifeless and inert, Prabartak, which Sri Aurobindo was writing at, was its only fountain of strength. It has helped a lot in changing the mood of Bengal. So again, he's looking at various stages in which, even while he was intervening, then he says, now, everywhere there is the problem, and this is the problem of India's weakness, he says. And I would go so far as to say this was true until about 10 years ago. We do see signs of change, but this is seriously an issue. And it is becoming an issue in Europe and in the United States, where it was not before. So this is a very important part of the text. In this connection, let me tell you briefly one or two things I have been observing for a long time. It is my belief that the main cause of India's weakness is not subjection, nor poverty, nor a lack of spirituality or religion, but a diminution of the power of thought, the spread of ignorance in the birthplace of knowledge. Everywhere I see an inability or unwillingness to think, incapacity of thought or thoughtophobia. This may have been all right in the medieval period, but now this attitude is the sign of a great decline. The medieval period was a night, the day of victory for the man of ignorance. In the modern world, it is the time of victory for the man of knowledge. He who can delve into and learn the truth about the world by thinking more, searching more, laboring more, gains more power. Now, immediately you're reminded of the contrast with Europe, and he speaks of this now. Take a look at Europe. You will see two things. A wide, limitless sea of thought, and the play of a huge and rapid yet disciplined force. The whole power of Europe is here, this wide sea of thought and huge, rapid, disciplined force. If he is describing that of Europe, then look at the condition of Europe today. You see massive decline, similar to what was India 100 years ago. In the United States, similarly, let's say in the 1930s, 40s, after the Second World War particularly, there was this similar turn, and today you see this massive decline in the masses. Of course, you have the exceptions, but in China you see the reverse. I don't have a full picture of China because I don't know what is the condition of the masses. But what I see in the literature, in the elite of China, you see this disciplined force and a huge power of thought activated now, taking charge, which is what is giving the power for China's rise. This is happening in India, but it's the elephant slowly getting up, but the momentum will be enormous when he gets up. So, and we continue the text. The whole power of Europe is here. It is by virtue of this power that she has been able to swallow the world, like our tapasvis of old, whose might held even the gods of the universe in terror, suspension, subjection. People say that Europe is rushing into the jaws of destruction. I do not think so. All these revolutions, all these upsettings are the first stages of a new creation. Now take a look at India, 1920, Europe and India. A few solitary giants aside, everywhere there is your simple man. That is, your average man who will not think, cannot think, has not an ounce of strength, just a momentary excitement. India wants the easy thought, the simple word. Europe wants the deep thought, the deep word. In Europe, even ordinary laborers think, want to know everything. They are not satisfied to know things halfway, but want to delve deeply into them. And this is still true for those who had the earlier education. It is no more true for the younger generations who have been brought up not to think. So we see this sharp shift in Europe, which points to a very dangerous decline. And this is deliberately done by cabal interests. They want you not to think. So to mesmerize you in social media and the idea of an easy life and mechanically follow. I just give an exaggerated example recently in JIPMER, which is one of the elite institutions, medical institutions in India in Pondicherry. One of the doctors who was treating Narad actually made this observation, openly said this. It's not our job to think. The thinking is left to the experts. They think and give us the protocol, and we follow the protocol blindly. And to me, this is very disturbing. This is the nature of the education. You're told you should not be thinking. Others have thought, now you repeat what they have thought. You see. But Europe is heading in that direction now. But until recently, this was true. Even the laborer in Europe, he thinks before doing his work. He tries to improve his work. You did not. In India, you have the laborers, a few, who have this pride of work. But the bulk of them just want to get it done and move on without bothering. The difference lies here. But there is a fatal limitation to the power and thought of Europe. When she enters the field of spirituality, her thought power stops working. There, Europe sees everything as a riddle, nebulous metaphysics, yogic hallucination. It rubs its eyes as in smoke and can see nothing clearly. But now in Europe, not a little effort is being made to surmount even this limitation. And then he contrasts with India. Thanks to our forefathers, we have this spiritual sense. And whoever has this sense has within his reach such knowledge, such power, as with one breath could blow all the immense strength of Europe away like a blade of grass. But power is needed to get this power. We, however, are not worshippers of power, we are worshippers of the easy way. But one cannot attain power by the easy way. Our forefathers swam in a vast sea of thought and gained a vast knowledge. They established a vast civilization. You see, India's influence, civilizational influence, ranged from to the extreme on the east, Japan and the Pacific Islands, who still remember their contact with India, all across through China, Southeast Asia, and on the other side through to the ranges of Russia, southern Europe, and even Western Europe, all the way to England. To this day, you still have those influences. But that was the reach of the civilization. But as they went forward on their path, they were overcome by exhaustion and weariness. So again, I am pointing to this. Something great accomplished, and then there is this exhaustion. And it can be civilizational, it can be racial, it can be in any collectivity, in any family. The force of their thought decreased, and along with it decreased the force of their creative power. Our civilization has become a stagnant backwater. Our religion a bigotry of externals. Our spirituality a faint glimmer of light or a momentary wave of intoxication. So long as this state lasts, any permanent resurgence of India is impossible. So really now you have to understand what has happened in the last 100 years in India. Because this state pretty much continued largely. In the younger generations, there is a mix. Some who are waking up and some who want the easy way, and even who sink. But the overall awakening in India is drifting in the right direction. And so we see already the stirrings when India is stirring suddenly now from all around the world, there is this pressure. Now we come to Bengal. It is in Bengal that this weakness has gone to the extreme. The Bengali has quickness of intellect, a capacity for feeling, intuition. In all these qualities, he is the foremost in India. Each of these qualities is necessary, but they are not in themselves sufficient. If they were added to them if there were added to them depth of thought, manly force, heroic audacity, proficiency, and delight in prolonged labor, the Bengali would become the leader not only of India but of the world. And I'm taking this also as part of sadhana. Look at all these words he has used. Work on it in yourself. And one of the important things is proficiency and delight in prolonged labor. Heroic audacity. You should not fear. Okay, let's try. It seems impossible, but why not? Trust the inspiration and flow and allow the Shakti to carry you. But the Bengali does not want this. He wants to pick up things the easy way. Knowledge without thought, results without labor, spiritual perfection after an easy discipline. He relies on emotional excitement, but excessive emotion devoid of knowledge is the very symptom of the disease. Now, all this will help you to understand what happened later in the decline that took place in Bengal. What has the Bengali been doing from the time of Chaitanya onwards, from long before that, in fact, catching hold of some easy superficial aspect of spiritual truth and dancing about for a few days on waves of emotion. Afterwards, there is exhaustion, inertia. You see everywhere where this happens, where the spirituality is replaced by this excitation, you see this. And at home, the gradual decline of Bengal, the ebbing away of her life force. In the end, what has the Bengali come to in his own province? He has nothing to eat, no clothes to wear, there is wailing on every side. His wealth, his business and trade, even his agriculture begin to pass slowly into the hands of outsiders. We have abandoned the yoga of divine power, and so the divine power has abandoned us. We practice the yoga of love, but where there is no knowledge or power, love does not stay. Narrowness and littleness come in. In a narrow and small mind, life and heart, love finds no room. You see, you started by chasing love, yoga of love, bhakti, devotion. But without knowledge or power, love went away, narrowness and littleness comes, and after that love goes away. What are you left with? Nothing. Where is there love in Bengal? Nowhere else, even in this division-ridden India, is there so much quarreling, strained relation, jealousy, hatred and factionalism as in Bengal. 1920, 10 years after Sri Aurobindo has left. So, and in the old days this was not so. They used to do things, movements which lasted centuries. I'm skipping text. The Bengalis' endeavor lasts for a day or two compared to what was an effort of centuries. You say what is needed is emotional excitement to fill the country with enthusiasm. We did all that in the political field during the Swadeshi period. Sri Aurobindo is referring to his own work with his brother also. Everything we did has fallen in the dust. Will there be a more auspicious outcome in the spiritual field? I don't say there has been no result. There has been. Every movement produces some result, but it is mostly in an increase of possibilities. That is not the right way to steadily actualize the thing. Therefore, I do not wish to make emotional excitement, feeling and mental enthusiasm the base any longer. They did all that. They rose. They actually built the whole freedom movement where there was none. They put forward the ideal of full freedom, Purna Swaraj, across India. It was an extraordinary work. But then that excitement on which it was built, that wanes. Look at what Gandhi did. It was similar. He pulled up excitement and excitation which was based on practically nothing, on some kind of a moral idealism, and that was all. But that excitement, those who were, unfortunately, the good people got sucked into it, and with that came the collapse and the partition. But, what does Sri Aurobindo want to do? Therefore, I do not wish to make emotional excitement, feeling and mental enthusiasm the base any longer. I want to make a vast and strong equality the foundation of my yoga. In all the activities of the being, which will be based on that equality, I want a complete, firm and unshakable power. Over that ocean of power, I want the radiation of the sun of knowledge. And in that luminous vastness, an established ecstasy of infinite love and bliss and oneness. Okay. So you see, first a foundation, a vast foundation of equality. Upon them firm and unshakable power. Upon that ocean of power, the radiation of knowledge. And upon that luminosity and vastness, the infinite love, bliss, oneness. You see the gradations. Equality, peace, but vast. Power, knowledge, and then love, oneness, and bliss. I do not want tens of thousands of disciples. It will be enough if I get as instruments of God 100 complete men free from petty egoism. Question is, can each one of us take steps in this direction? And I'm not saying you need to be perfect. Even the fact that you make partial steps, the Shakti will work through you to do work that you are incapable of doing, but at least you will be there as a support for doing, despite yourself, despite your other weaknesses. Remember what he said earlier, if you have that, you don't need even those other things. Of course, if you have those other things, that is useful. I have no confidence in guruhood of the usual type. I do not want to be a guru. What I want is for someone awakened by my touch or by that of another to manifest from within his sleeping divinity and to realize the divine life. Such men will uplift this country. And this now I'll extend to the whole world. Because this, what he's describing, is literally the condition everywhere. Wherever you see even attempts for a pushback against the cabal, it is largely on some kind of excitation. It still does not have this spiritual depth and foundation. And if you really want this struggle to be won and humanity to be freed, this foundation is absolutely essential. And all this really points to the question in response to what Anupam has asked, will Bengal be able to rise? It depends on this, really. And then for those who might think this is too despairing as a message, do not think from reading this lecture that I despair of the future of Bengal. I too hope for what they are saying, that this time a great light will manifest in Bengal. But I've tried to show the other side of the shield, where the defects, failings and deficiencies lie. If these remain, that light will not be great, nor will it endure. So you'll say, yes, but there are spiritual leaders. He says, somehow I do not. The saints and great men that you have written about appear to me rather dubious. Somehow I do not find in them what I am looking for. Dayananda, not Swami Dayananda of Arya Samaj. He's speaking of a yogi who was in eastern Bengal. Dayananda has all sorts of wonderful powers. Illiterate disciples of his do remarkable automatic writing. But this is only a psychic faculty, etc., not the real thing. So I skip all this, and he says, I'm not going back to Bengal just now, not because Bengal is not ready, but because I am not ready. If the unripe goes amid the unripe, what can he accomplish? And he signs. That is Sri Aurobindo's letter to his brother. Now, there's another angle which Sri Aurobindo writes about, where this helplessness in the face of colonization, he takes up from a different angle, and which describes the condition today. He says, he's speaking of social reform, etc. Social reform, what reform can there be of a society of lay figures who pretend to be men? Industrial progress, what will be the use of riches which may be taken from us at any time by the strong hand? Moral and religious improvement, what truth or value have these phrases to men who see their religion outraged before their eyes and whose wives are never safe from dishonor? And all this Sri Aurobindo is writing in 1907, May. So what's the required thing? He says, get strength first, get independence, and all these things will be added to you. But persist in your foolish moderation, your unreasonable prudence, and Another 50 years will find you more degraded than ever. A nation of Greeks with polished intellects and debased souls, body and soul, helplessly at the mercy of alien masters. Now, here suddenly he is warning you in 50 years what's going to happen. This actually has happened. And that's how you will understand the condition of Bengal today. And the connection, the relation of the Greeks is also interesting. Because he explains elsewhere, I won't go into the text because we don't have time. He says the Greeks could not outgrow their small city-state context and therefore could not build a strong nation. As a result has been this: polished intellects but debased souls, bodies, and helplessly at the mercy of alien masters. Now I'm going to read a portion which you will find literally describes the condition in Bangladesh and West Bengal. That's why I've named the topic today West Bengal, because you have to ask what is East Bengal, that's Bangladesh, and what is the relation between the two. We are to rush to the defense of our temples, our holy images, the honor of our women. That's what they say. But who are we? Not surely the people of East Bengal and Northern Bengal, who, outnumbered, overwhelmed, are struggling against overwhelming odds in spite of weak points. In West Bengal, the Hindus are in an overwhelming majority. In West Bengal, there is a sturdy Hindu lower class. There are thousands of students who throng to Swadeshi meetings and parade at Swadeshi Jatras and festivals. But West Bengal is under the spell of moderate colleagues. And so the result is this, that you are unable to even defend, protect your temples. And so I am showing you how circumstances were already in place long ago for the decline. The process has begun and the psychological causes of those decline. And yet the potential for the strength and the great power in the Bengali people. So what happened at that point was the British recognized the awakening that was taking place in Bengal. This action of the Shakti had begun. And the best way forward for them was to cut it in its very roots, what Sri Aurobindo described earlier as the attacking forces. And partition was the first step they took. By partitioning Bengal into two, East and West, and then many other variations upon adjustments, essentially they highlighted the Muslim as a separate force, gave to them certain advantages or benefits of a majority in a region. You may say it was the classic divide and rule policy of the British Empire, but what it did effectively was it split. It split the freedom movement and became the root subsequently, when Gandhi accepted this, became the root of partition again of the whole of India. So the partition of West Bengal, of Bengal at that time, which Sri Aurobindo speaks of in really harsh terms as one of the greatest tragedies of the country, that became another 30 years later, 35 years later, the partition of India. So you have to understand these things are not casual. The roots, psychological roots which were there, then applied, and what we have seen of the analysis of the Indian people generally, all this also permitted the partition of Bengal. There are a couple of questions to which Sri Aurobindo replies. This is during the partition 1947, where again Bengal was also partitioned now into Bangladesh. So somebody asks, Muslims, descendants of foreigners, favored the partition of Bengal. Yes, and that is what the British did when they first partitioned Bengal in 1905. Sri Aurobindo replies, this would seem to indicate that all the Mohammedans in India are descendants of foreigners. But the idea of two nationalities in India is only a newfangled notion invented by Jinnah for his purposes and contrary to facts. More than 90% of the Indian Muslimans are descendants of converted Hindus and belong as much to the Indian nation as the Hindus themselves. This process of conversion has continued all along. Jinnah is himself a descendant of Hindu converted in fairly recent times. And many of the most famous Mohammedan leaders have a similar origin. Someone says, Assam had a majority of Muslims. Sri Aurobindo's response, the majority in Assam is made up of Hindus and tribal peoples. In Assam proper, the Musulmans are only 20% of the population. The balance has been altered by the inclusion of Sylhet, a Bengali district in Assam, but even so the non-Musulmans predominate. Why am I reading this? You'll see exactly the same things happening today in West Bengal. Mamata Banerjee's primary support base is illegal immigrants from Bangladesh with a strong radicalized Muslim identity. And for them to carve out from India another chunk of India is the long-term goal, for which they back her. For her, it's political expediency. But as a result, the groups that form the primary members of the party are largely now with an ideological base, which was the basis of the partition of Bengal in 1905, of India in 1947. Now, I've put two links in today's discussion, where in the description box, in one of them, you will see the mayor of Kolkata, who is very close to the chief minister, thanks her for making Urdu a compulsory language and says very soon half of Bengali population will speak Urdu. You must understand, Bangladesh broke away from Pakistan because they wanted to impose Urdu. And Bangladesh, because it's also primarily Bengali, although Islamized, but still Bengali in its identity still. So I hope eventually the Islamic identity will fall out easily, but the Bengali identity is still strong. And in West Bengal, which was separated during partition, you find the very opposite taking place, an acceptance of Urdu and an imposition of Urdu as a language, even though Muslims are 10%. At least that's the official number. We are not counting the illegal immigrants, which are enormous. The same Calcutta mayor refers to his constituency in Kolkata, which is voting him, as mini Pakistan. And proudly, he says this to the Pakistani newspapers, this is my mini Pakistan. So the ideology, the mentality is all orienting towards partition. What you see today, and of which this rape and murder is only a blatant symptom, is a complete takeover of a people by forces, the exact same forces, intending to divide and partition India, but focusing now on West Bengal, using political expediency and leveraging the weakness of the Bengali mind and heart. On the other side, among the converts, the strength of the Bengali mind and heart has been amplified by an exaggerate ideology, but now directed to an radical Islam. You see, the hearts turn to this passionate call, which earlier would have been for the unity of India and freedom of India, is now turned for the partition of India. You see, the strength has been taken to one side and taken off track. The weakness has been exaggerated and made even more subdued. This is the main problem, of which all the circumstances, situation that you see are symptoms. So I have used these texts as a base to appreciate Sri Aurobindo's depth of insight, his foresight looking at the future of India, but also his observations which help us to understand what is happening today and even what needs to be done to correct it. There is a very interesting text, and I will end with this, of Sri Aurobindo, which is like notes he made on a sheet of paper without a date, but it's from a certain early period. And in the collected works, it is in volume 6 now, and I'll just read from this. These are notes, so they are just indicative, and you see what he's doing in the thought process, looking at the future. The relations of the Bengalis to other races of India, Bengali and Maratha, creation and concentration, traditions, weight of intellectual basis, Rajput, Islam, Bihar. These are dotted notes. Resulting unerringness of tendency as illustrated by vernacular literature. Preparatory light for religious and social reconstruction. Preparatory light for religious and social reconstruction. Tendency towards science and industry. Failure in education and physical training. Interesting. You see, if you just look at the keywords, it's like he's seeing the trends. Maybe he was preparing to write an article discussing all this. And then in the series of notes, it's literally he's setting the program for the rebuilding. He says, necessity of provincial before national development, so you need to have local development. Literary reconstruction, academy, its duties, religious reconstruction, social reconstruction, educational reconstruction, science and industry, political reconstruction, the masses. You see the sequencing, very interesting. Elements in Bengal, prince, pleader and peasant, possible expansion of Bengal. Let the Bengalis and Marathas organize themselves and spread their influence over the rest of India. The genius of the Bengalis is at present original, creative, moving towards development and acquisition. The genius of the Marathas is critical, conservative, standing in the concentration of what it has already developed and acquired. The Bengali is not weighed by the race, in the race by traditions inconsistent with present necessities. Maratha activity has been the most brilliant passage in our history since the fall of Prithviraj. And we may well look back to it with pride and admiration, but it is to be feared that it did not proceed upon a sufficiently intellectual basis. Had the movement of thought and intelligence expressed in the writings of Ramdas, Tukaram, Moropant been allowed first to fulfill itself, and the Maratha development refrained from transferring itself too hastily into the sphere of political action, the result might have been more secure, more lasting. So now he is comparing the complementarity of these two. Then he says that we should all act together is a fine thing, but the question still remains, what will that action come to? When all the limbs are themselves too weak and incoherent to effect anything, it is cold comfort to be told that they are learning to cohere with one another. Let them cohere among themselves first. So, I'm skipping the rest. So now I think with this I'm going to pause this part of the discussion. I have put 3 more links. One is Sri Aurobindo in Bengal by Rishabh Chand. It's a chapter from his biography of Sri Aurobindo. And there he describes Sri Aurobindo's action in waking up Bengal. It's a fascinating thing. It's longish, but you get a big picture of the work that he was doing. And there's a second one, which is an article by Sanjeev Nair about the partition of Bengal in 1905, if you want to understand the game played by the British then, but how it then affected. And then the Great Bengal Tragedy by Bharat Karnad, which discusses what is happening in Bengal as well as East Bengal, which is Bangladesh. So I think these you will find useful in this context. But I've also put the context to our sadhana. Remember what we need to do and what is the work ahead of us. If you recall the words of what he wrote to his brother, where he says, "Therefore, I do not wish to make emotional excitement, feeling and mental enthusiasm the base any longer. I want to make a vast, strong equality the foundation of my yoga." And we have to look at each word. Equality, and you see it's the framework of the integral yoga, the very first base, the first limb. But it has to become vast. Your consciousness itself that leans into equality must widen. In all the activities of the being, which will be based on that equality, I want a complete, firm, and unshakable power. You can't have the power before the equality. It will follow the equality. Over that ocean of power, I want the radiation of a sun of knowledge. Now, for some of us, the power aspect may come not develop fully, the knowledge aspect may develop first, but between knowledge and power, one of these must become wide enough and combine with the other. Otherwise, the knowledge is important and the power is misguided. Over. And in that luminous vastness, an established ecstasy of infinite love and bliss and oneness. It will be enough if I can get as instruments of God 100 complete men free from petty egoism. You don't have to be free of the larger egoisms or complexities of egoism, just out of the pettiness of egoism. And the rest then will be worked out if you make that little effort. So I think this is where I will pause. Maybe I take a quick look at the chat box, but most of the comments or questions I'll keep for next time. Yes, so Harish asks, what is the role of communism in West Bengal? How is it impacting present-day Bengal? It's very important because I missed this point. You remember Sri Aurobindo gave a list of stages that Bengal was going through of the religions. And it's fascinating to understand how actually there is a process which is guided and there's a rationale to it. If Sri Aurobindo had written in greater detail of India's history, it would have been fascinating to understand from this perspective. And so he gives the sequence of the things that happened in Bengal. But the last which he speaks of was this devotionalism of the Vaishnava kind. But then subsequently, something very interesting takes place. Bengal becomes the hub of communism. And how do you explain this? You cannot explain this if you follow it purely in terms of religion. You have to understand the role of the religion of communism. Communism is religion, remember? It has its own gods. And it throws out all other religions of the heart. It has a religion which is a partial rationality based on certain ideas and beliefs promoted by its founders of certain concept of collectivism. In Bengal, which had a very strong feudal remnant and a large part from the Islamic invasions, when this religious phase was completed and it tried to move from the devotional heart opening to a rational development, the elite in Bengal looked at reasoning mind, and the vehicle at that point, Soviet Union had just come. It offered a hope and a possibility of collective well-being free from the domination of the feudal structures. And it was logical, or seemed to be. And the intelligentsia turned, because they were trained by the West, remember Sri Aurobindo refers to that, it valued the Western teaching more than the Indian, it turned and caught that. And then that became entrenched. It's interesting that in India, the two places where communism is most entrenched is West Bengal and Kerala, where the turn to intellect seized upon this first. Because in these two places there had been already the cutting of roots. What happened in Kerala and then that coast generally was again there was a strong base of the European rule. You see, even parts of Goa continued to be owned by Europeans long after India had become free. But that whole region there was a penetration and a strong Islamic domination in Kerala also, which even today is a point of conflict. And so as a result, a feudal tendency. And so these two places which had these similar tendencies have entrenched communism. And the nature of communism, once it gets in, it destroys everything else and subverts all systems so that it can never be overthrown. What is remarkable is Mamata Banerjee was able to overthrow communism. And she appealed to the heart of the Bengali. And her slogan when she came to power was Ma Mati Manush. Mother, earth, and humanity. Using Bengali alliteration, but still it was an appeal at the heart But in order to overthrow that entrenched mafia of communism, she had to build her own mafia, for which she resorted to the religious group of the Islamic ideology. And so that became her strong base. The Hindu base were attracted by her slogans. That became the strong base for their ends. And she got the necessary support. Once she came to power, she organized her own mafia. Even if she, and there are many who believe that she was genuine in her intention, and I have no reason to doubt that, at least initially, once having come to power on the basis of these support bases, she had no choice but to remain bound to their demands or controlled by them. And at some point, the headiness of her own ambition has overwhelmed whatever goodwill she might have had initially. She actually openly speaks of wanting to become Prime Minister of the country. And it's quite ridiculous because nowhere in India is there any great respect for her. But she has no idea. She's not even conscious of it. She's so overwhelmed by the ambition of her own fantasy. But you see here the way the machinery works. She seized upon a certain possibility and a certain tendency of the people, came up to power maybe with good intentions, but has herself has got lost in her own sense of power and importance. Maital asks, could you address the situation of job markets, layoffs, and people who are dehumanized by corporates? Yes, I'm glad you asked this because you see all that we discussed corresponds to this situation. There has actually been in the Indian educational system, because of this exaggerated continuation of the colonial education and all the things Sri Aurobindo has spoken of the nature of the education, which still continues, unfortunately, to this day. The fact that the mind of the Indian children has been numbed for decades, and the people who came out with some independent thinking are those who broke away from India, even if they have an Indian education. They survived it and then went to the West, where they got nourished by the independent thinking and the power of thought in the West. Many stayed on. Some, having got that benefit, want to give back to the country or want to come back from deeper connections. And when they come back, they have initiated the, so to say, kind of an industrial or thought renaissance in certain parts. You'll see today the greatest defenders of the Hindu values and the Hindu reawakening are people who have had exposure in the West. Rajiv Malhotra is a very good example. Recently, he has released a book, by the way, which discusses how Sri Aurobindo's ideas were appropriated by Western thinkers, and then they turned around and subverted Sri Aurobindo's thoughts or misrepresented them for their own interests. Maybe we'll have a chance to speak about it. But, and his whole team, the primary team, even those who are fighting today prominently for the resurgence and reawakening of Hindu values and the rights of the Hindus who have lesser rights in a majority Hindu country, very, very strangely, are largely influenced by their exposure to the West. So it's not yet that the Indian consciousness has found its own independent power of thought. So a large part of the Indian industry came from the multinational interests when under Manmohan Singh, large parts of India were basically sold off to the Western interests. They came in, bought up very cheap, dirt cheap, because of having reduced the rupee value, devalued just like that overnight by at least 5 times. India became 5 times cheaper for everybody to come and buy up assets and lands. One of the things this has done, and combined with the corruption, is land prices in India is under huge pressure, and sometimes 100 times more for a proportional value of land in any other country in other parts of the world. So even the common man is unable to possess land, or the lands are cut up into tiny, tiny pockets within the cities. And all these are distortions coming from wrong education, followed by mixed, again, European or American values in business and industry. And continuing this momentum gave you momentary wealth, but subsequently comes this sudden point where, and this is, I've heard from many people in industry, the common Indian coming out of the educational system is unemployable today. Their basic ability to think is not there, and they have these pompous pretensions of self-importance and demands for high salaries. But the performance, the skills, the capacity to think for yourself is so shallow as to be incompetent. I'm speaking of masses. Of course, you have the exceptions, and the middle class and the upper middle class, not economically, I mean intellectually, still has. But the larger mass, which comes out from this grinding education, comes out damaged, brain damaged, and they have false ideas projected by the media, which will make the condition worse, dehumanizing, because basically what happened when India had this boom of software, you were reduced to just low-grade workers, and with very little capacity you had very high salaries, and suddenly everyone thought that's the reference. It doesn't work. An engineer who may have spent 10 years of intense mathematical, technical skills and capacities was earning 1/5 of what an IT industry employee was earning for doing nothing except talking with an American accent to Americans across the telephone. And it didn't make sense. So there has been a huge distortion in pay scales as well as in competencies, and education has done nothing because it has not changed at all to help this. So what I would say to Maital's observation, it will get worse. And this is what Mamata Banerjee in West Bengal has leveraged by giving jobs to these very people. But what do you do when you give them a job in which they earn more by corruption than by doing the job itself? You have a collapse of civilizational values. And this is happening not just in India, it's happening in large parts of Europe, where in France, you have people, young people, who are not interested in doing hard work. And I'll share one example, which was for me one of the most shocking this time when I was briefly visiting a person who has spent 50 years building an orchard, which is organic, with some of the best fruits, which he ships all over the world. His daughter, who was 16 years old, he said, I cannot continue, I cannot sell, because if I sell, everything will be destroyed. I'll come to that part shortly. His daughter, when she was 16 years old, said, don't worry, father, once I complete my education, I will take over. I will inherit all this and do the hard work. She completes her education 5 years later and says, I'm sorry, I cannot keep my promise. I'm not interested in hard work. I want the easy life. And when all of them turn, and that's why I said the same pattern which you saw in India 100 years ago is happening in the US and in Europe. In US it is so bad. You'll see these videos, they go into certain poorer areas where education is of a very low grade. They ask them, show me on the map where is the United States, and they cannot pick it out. And this is so sad. And they ask questions like, which is, and they name some country and say, which state of the US is it? And they can't make out that it's a country which is not part of the US. And that's the level of education. And these are the people looking for employment. And the same thing happening in Europe. And so to them, it is extremely attractive when the cabal tells them, you know what, we will give you universal income. You have to do nothing. You will get your money every month and you just buy your food and live. And we will provide you this, vote for us. This is the cabal strategy to push you to this level of dependence, collapse the job market, and then offer you an easy way to switch to hard, centralized bureaucracy of global communism or one world government, in which you will be paid your money, you will own nothing, and you will be happy. At least that's their promise, which is what the World Economic Forum actually states this. You will own nothing, but you will be happy. So what you're seeing today in dehumanization and the collapse in the job market is nothing compared to what will happen with AI taking over. Because AI is going to replace anything which is trainable to a human being. And what happens then? Yes, there are corrections, there are ways possible. We don't all need job markets if you bring free energy. So many things are possible. But even that is secondary. Will people wake up and think for themselves and say, no, this is wrong and we would prefer that? So I'm coming to the story in France. What happened to this man, what he said to me? And I asked him questions because I was curious. I said, what do you do? What will you do? He said, I have no choice except to sell. But if I sell, it will go to certain groups which are against the French values. They are coming from other countries who will buy it up and then do what? Replace it by solar cells, solar panels, because that makes more sense. So a multinational will come in. We don't want trees. What's the use of trees? We convert it to solar panels, we sell electricity. Cheap money. What about the food? Who will grow the food? That's not our problem. And that's what you see all over the world happening. They're shutting down food supply sources so that there'll be a massive famine artificially created where people get desperate and then they will all turn to whatever the global agenda is. They almost did it during the lockdown, where you had effectively not enough supply of food in certain parts. But the same they're doing with technology. Certain technologies which would make you independent are being shut out or prices raised dramatically. Others which keep you hypnotized, like large TV panels, are being made cheaper. So there's a deliberate shift to make you, put you in this dependence where you'll sit before a TV chewing potato chips and in a hypnotized state with your universal income coming, and maybe you do a little bit of work here and there and go to sleep. So what happened to this man? I said, what will you do? He said, I don't want to sell to them. I'm trying to find some buyer who will actually protect this. But then he said something even more shocking. He said, I don't even want to stay in France. Why? He said, for the last 40 years, I have been paying thousands of euros, or at that time francs, to the government, which will provide for you when you are old, when you retire. And today what the government has done is taken away my retirement money and will give me only 600 euros a month, which is barely enough to survive. And even there, what the government said to him, if you want to come into that situation after retirement where we pay you this tiny sum and you've paid thousands per year, and we don't even pay you something minimally representative of that, in order to receive that, to ensure that you don't make money at the same time by selling from your orchard, you have to cut down all the trees in your orchard. But you have the right to maintain 1 acre just for yourself, for your comfort. Do you realize how stupid this government policy is? You have to cut down your orchard when you retire so that you will receive your retirement money which you paid the government for, so that they will give it back to you when you retire. And that orchard took 50 years to build. He says, if I cut it down now, the next person who needs to take over will take 50 years to build it. What about thinking of the long-term good of the country? No, they don't care. And this is why I said you have to understand the first few sessions we spoke about the cabal and its satanic agenda and one world government control system. So this is happening everywhere. In India, so far we are still, the people who have goodwill for the country and who love the country are in power. So they are doing what's good for the country. But how long can you sustain if the people do not wake up and start thinking and do what is right? Or make the effort to love sustained effort of work? It's not going to be easy. The period coming ahead is going to be difficult for everybody. And even in India, it's not going to be easy. Yes, so Shankaran says that there are Gurukulams set up by people, alumni who have sacrificed their career and wealth to give an alternate education to children. Yes, these are the people. They love their country. They love the people, they love humanity, and they will do what it takes. And these are the people who are making the difference. And so Sumana says, what can we do at an individual level to save Bengal and India? Review what Sri Aurobindo said. And this applies, and I'm deliberately generalizing it, not just Bengal, not just India, it's for the world, because the circumstances of the world are heading in exactly the same direction, deliberately, intentionally done. What the British were able to do successfully to destroy Bengal by sinking the educational system, and then subsequently communism sank the whole industry. That is being done deliberately across the world by the global cabal. First sink the education and then sink industry. What happens? People are helpless. Then you offer universal income and total control, and that's it. They rule you. Makaran says, Durga Stotra made me cry for weeks, gave me strength when I needed the most. So I would, maybe others will find that helpful also. Makaran Das gives pointers about equality as the first requirement. Look up my talks, a number from the evening series number 82 onwards, which deal with the spiritual life, and then particularly where we enter the discussion on the framework of the integral yoga, because that's a detailed working. But you can read Sri Aurobindo in the Synthesis of Yoga, where he discusses the yoga of self-perfection. And Verena says, unfortunately, not even Aurovillians were or are courageous enough to uncompromisingly live Sri Aurobindo's ideas on free progress education. Yes, it's one of the very sad things. One of the very sad things is in the ashram school, for example, initially when the educational system was started, the teachers were all coming from the colonial education system, and the mother had to struggle to bring about change. And I remember Tanmayda, he was a Frenchman, interestingly, who went to the mother and said, here is Sri Aurobindo writing all this, and here's what we are doing, and the two don't correspond. Why aren't we doing what Sri Aurobindo has written about education? And the mother said, at last somebody is thinking. But it took a Frenchman to start thinking. And the Indian teachers mostly were just, this is all we know, this is all we can do, this is all we are interested in doing. I'm sorry if it hurts a few people to say this, but even Nirodha, who was one of the English teachers, was against the framework of education that the mother was trying to implement. He was part of the group that opposed it, while there was another group that was for it. And there was this conflict. And mother took it in the right spirit, that was a conflict of mindsets. But the thing is, he was one of those who was rooted in the Western education system and could not break out of his own roots, because that was the nature of the mind. And so even Sri Aurobindo had to criticize him many times. You will see in his letters that you're so stubborn, so narrow and rigid in your thought, etc., etc. But there was a deeper side, which that's not our concern. We're not looking at his spiritual side, we're looking at this. And so we had a problem in the ashram, a split within the school. So for a long time there was a free progress education and then the conventional education moving parallelly. Now, I'm not saying free progress is the only way. Integral education is the way, of which free progress is one of the mechanisms and perhaps an important part. And those who actually practiced this were constantly sustained, harassed by those who were against, and the ones who were against were in charge of the machinery and continue to be in charge today. This is the sad part. And so when Auroville started, the mother put some of the most forward-thinking people in the educational system, which included, by the way, Yvonne. Yvonne, who was Medhananda's colleague, she was put in charge of the educational system there, and others who she sent, Norman Dowsett was another, to help build. So she had to take people who came from the West. Why? Because the thinking power had not been suppressed too much. And the result was a change began. The mother did everything. But the moment the balance tilted, structures shifted, and there was a rebellion which took place, conflict which took place, the power systems changed, and those who took charge lost that interest or went back to the conventional thing. We do find more recently in the last 10-20 years occasional attempts. Some teachers still try to do. There are pockets now where you see this happening. Deepanam was one of the schools which I know was working. Others which have more recently come, I don't know them all. But there are these pockets. But the main framework of education did not shift fundamentally. In fact, it even became hostile to this approach and even hostile to Sri Aurobindo and the mother. And I was a little disturbed when I heard some of the stories where one of the children saw the photo of the mother on the wall in the school and said, "Who is that?" And the teacher said, "Oh, that's just an old woman." And that was it, dismissed. And unfortunately, drugs and other things have got into the children, alcohol, majorly at the age of 14, 15, 16 in Auroville. It got into our school. One of the children was actually a relative, one of the trustees, one of the structure organizer, institutional heads, let's say, who is inimical to Sri Aurobindo and the mother. One of his relatives was caught by the police, and they used the full power of the ashram and the money of the ashram to get his relative freed. Same thing happening in Auroville. Why is this happening? All comes down to the things we discussed now. Will common man wake up? And the question I ask even in the ashram and in Auroville, you're here for what? Will you then wake up and stand for what you're here for? And will you make sure, even if the administration has been hijacked or has no interest in the deeper values, would you do the right thing in your space and push back when they suppress the hijack, when they suppress you by hijacking? The mother explicitly stated how important it was to send the darshan messages to people. It was a physical way of reaching the spiritual force to people across the world. It was a physical vehicle to carry that. And the current administration has stopped just 2 years ago. They stopped the darshan messages. They stopped for a long time the birthday card. They've closed Sri Aurobindo's room. You can't go on your birthdays anymore. Earlier you could go every day. They stopped that, reduced it to just people on their birthdays. Now they've stopped that. And on your birthday you get to sit next to the samadhi for which everyone else is pushed out. This is unacceptable from the objects that the ashram is for, even from the examples set by the mother and Sri Aurobindo, even from the things they have stated explicitly, and not a single person in the community is willing to stand up and speak about it for fear of being trampled. You see the exact same situation which you saw in Bengal, in India at that time, when there was the effort to awaken people, and Sri Aurobindo came on the scene and said, we want full freedom, and people told him it is impossible. And he speaks about this in one of his talks. He says, everybody says it's impossible, but see what we accomplished in West Bengal. In Bengal at that time. Why? Because of this love for the Shakti, love for the mother, love for the motherland. And that, at the very least, a spiritual aspiration that says, this I will not compromise, is needed in the ashram, in Auroville, in West Bengal, in East Bengal, in India, in every nation. Love your country, love the Divine Mother, love the divine consciousness that presides over the civilization and the nation. Work for the rebuilding and love humanity and the larger spiritual awakening of humanity. So somewhere we have to prioritize this, and for this we should be willing to do whatever is needed to prepare ourselves, to build ourselves, review the pointers Sri Aurobindo gave. See what you have already as a strength, see what you have as something missing, and just start working on it. Remember, you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to have attained a very high stage or achievement in your development. Just this dedication to the Divine Mother and asking her, calling on Shakti to give you the strength to do what is right, to give you the wisdom, to give you the love for the right action. That's already the beginning that you need. Break free from narrow egoism that says, oh, first I must protect my interest. You see, this happened in the ashram when a large number of people came forward first and said, we will not accept the abuse of Sri Aurobindo. The moment the threat came from the administration, a large number went silent out of fear. Some were aged, they said, yes, but who will look after me when I am aged, and if they deny me medical facilities? That's where the break came. And afterwards they were miserable because within them there was a conflict with their own psychic aspiration. Those who stood by, they suffered, but they were happy. They were always smiling because they had stood by the soul's values. Are we ready to do that? Are we ready to make the effort? And I see in India, even those who are in position of power today, with goodwill and good intentions, are incompetent to do certain things which are outside their domain of capacity. And so, where are the competent people? Can we get them to do it? So we have these small pockets. That's a very good start, but it's not enough. Somewhere along the way, there has to be a larger awakening, and it has to be at its foundation spiritually founded, even if it is not explicitly spiritual in the form. If you are going to teach children about your nation's history, it must be with the deeper understanding of the evolutionary turn of the growth of the nation. That would be the underlying spiritual foundation, even if you don't speak about it in explicit spiritual terms. But my question would be, if India's civilizational values are spiritual, psychic and intuitive, should this not be explicitly stated? And the only reason you cannot do that is the moment you use that word, you have all these extremist ideologies, religious, which will say, you are now Hinduizing. And we need an appropriate response. Spirituality, what it means, and this needs to be stated, and we need a public discourse about this. So I'm showing you what I think needs to happen. I don't see it happening yet. But perhaps one can say the people who can take a few steps in that direction are appearing in the environment. But most importantly, today we have the power of the collective media through the internet. And so something which was impossible at that time is possible now. Sri Aurobindo's writings are just available to everybody. You type a few keystrokes, you get it. Isn't it? The source of inspiration is now available everywhere. And then the question is, are you interested in actually turning to it? And then will you take the small steps needed to put it into practice, not just thinking. You remember the first text I read where he says that you are not a nationalist if you're only thinking. It has to turn into real action. And this would apply everywhere. So I think we have completed the time that we have. But you see the big picture, and I've used this occasion to not speak so much about the situation in West Bengal, but show you the psychology behind. Using the examples of what Sri Aurobindo says about Bengal and India, anywhere in any country, observe these characteristics and qualities in yourself. It's not a question of race anymore. It's a question of what is within you. Work to build the others so that you can avoid the same situation repeating. I would like to believe that we are going to make it through, but I cannot see yet what will be the transition time and how much suffering is required. Hopefully it will not be much, but all of us have to start in our lives and then slowly, gently influencing those who come in our lives in various ways. And the more you grow in your own alignment, the impact of what you speak or what you do without speaking will be more effective and more real. Let's keep this as our priority in our aspiration, in our spiritual practice. We can all concentrate on this in aspiration. Namaste.
Namaste. Thank you.